Good morning, Facebook. It's the day after the holiday, and I'm headed to work. I wanted to take the opportunity to have a discussion about male and female relationships and the chaotic state in which we find things, right? I think this applies to both genders, regardless to class or color. But I am specifically speaking about the dynamics that apply to people of color. That people who are called colored. So-called African Americans or so-called Negroes, the original people. I'm speaking to us, right? There is a disconnect, in terms of what we want, how we want it, how we address each other. We have to acknowledge, right, that overall our relationships dynamics is chaotic and out of whack. Something is destabilized, right? Women have a negative view for the most part, not all women, but I'm speaking specifically about those that do, right? The concept of the independent woman is antagonistic toward masculinity, right? And the male perspective doesn't fare any better, to be honest with you. Our reaction to our woman's evolution inside of this society has a tendency to not just be reactionary, but to be somewhat condescending and antagonistic, as if some of the things that our women want, right, and require is unnecessary and intolerable, right? Do our women have a right to loyalty? Of course they do. Do they have a right to free thought? Of course they do. Do they have a right to have an independent existence, which then can be harmonized with both their man, their family, and their community? Of course they do. I don't think that no rational and well-grounded man would argue against those points. I think what creates the tension is how we move to achieve these things, and more importantly, how we express them. Raise your tone a little and you're angry, right, and hostile. Lower your tone a little and you're passive. It can be perceived to be passive aggressive, and that's not just with women, that's with men as well. I want to introduce you to an ideal, right? Because the nature of how men and women deal with each other in this society can be tracked back to the literature that we read and embrace as the norm, right? And let's take this to the first breakdown in a relationship that we were presented with in scriptures, the Adam and Eve, if you will, right? Think about this. Adam, according to how it is presented in scriptures, was in paradise. He had everything, right? Everything was at his disposal, with the exception of the fact that he was alone. He wasn't alone in the sense that it wasn't other life, that he can be companions with. He was alone in a sense that there was no one that he could be intimate with, right? And that could be his companion and his mate. And thus God said it is not right that man should be alone in paradise. So he made woman from the rib of Adam. That's how the story goes. I'm independent of that. I mean, I didn't write that. That's what I mean. You know, I'm not the author of that narration and that story and that ideal that the world has came to embrace. That God made Eve from the rib of Adam, from bone of my bone. But now look at this. God brings forth this woman, right? Presents her to Adam, right? And Adam's response is, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, right? And acknowledging this equity between man and woman. That's how it began, right? According to this storyline. He acknowledges the value of this person, that this person is from him, right? And is a part of him outside of him. And that this person is needed in order for him to be complete, right? So God says, what God has brought together, let no man rend asunder. Think about that. What God has brought together, let no man rend asunder. Wasn't he the first man? So what man would rent it asunder, right? Man's first test, this man we call Adam, right? When, Eve was approached by the serpent, we talking about male and female relationships and the breakdown and why things are the way they are, right? It is natural for a woman to want the best for her men, right? If a woman sees an opportunity to make her man strong, right? And to make him equal with someone else so that he's not beneath them, but he's on equal footing. I don't think that that's something that we should see as sinful, right? Or be alarmed by. It's natural for a woman to want to make her man strong and keep her man strong, or at least present him with the opportunity, right? Whether it's some type of knowledge, it's some type of training, or insight, that's natural for a woman to do. So when the opportunity came with respect to, whether it's a mistake or not, that Adam could be equal with God, she seized upon the opportunity. This is the storyline. That's how it's given to us, right? And that wasn't a problem, right? I don't think that that's what God took issue with. I think God already knew that that was going to happen, right? I think in free will, what God wanted to see was whether or not Adam was grateful for what had been given to him. If he could stand by his acknowledgement that this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. And when God first asked him, which he didn't need to ask, if he's omnipotent and, aware of everything at all times, he didn't need to ask him, did you eat from the tree, right? But when he asked him this, Adam's response is amazing if we think about it. And it's at the root of our disharmony with our women, showing how out of sync we are, right? Look how Adam detached himself from his woman. He said, the woman you gave me and I did eat. He didn't say, my baby gave me, and, in that moment of weakness, God, my bad, we'll do better. He didn't atone. He cast the blame on his chick. That's some deep shit right there. This is the only woman in the world, according to the storyline. Lisa's your woman. And rather than you going down with the ship, or be willing to go down with the ship, the first thing you do is throw her under the bus. You know what I mean? And if we think about it, right, in this narration of what occurs there, right, when you go back to a lot of the gripes, legitimate ones, not that far-fetched shit that people do from manipulating, girls are players too, but the legitimate gripes that our women have, right, is that they feel as though they have been thrown under the bus, right? They feel as though they have been thrown under the bus. They feel as though there has, in your mind, and what you do, right, outside of the house and outside of the relationship, that you separate them from being bone of your bone and flesh of your flesh. That oneness is missing. You threw that under the bus. You know what I mean? She's just a woman now. She's not my baby. She's not my wife. She's not my love. None of that. And that in a moment, for whatever reason, to satisfy your personal survival, if you will, your personal pleasure, you throw her under the bus. And then that is the root cause of a lot of our displeasure, right? And unhappiness. Like Muhammad said, that happiness is total and complete satisfaction with one true self. Think about that, right? If she's a part of us, then in order for us to be happy, our true self, both who we are internally as well as our true self outside of ourselves, has to be happy. You have to have a total and complete satisfaction with our true self. Do we have that? Do we know how to achieve that? Right? Do we even seek to achieve that? I was talking to Brother General, and he triggered something in my mind. He was talking about his daughter, and he was saying about the chemistry, right? And a female, and how the body is just natural for certain things to occur, and that if you don't prepare yourself mentally to address those things, you can say what you want to say. You will give into your chemistry. And that was a hell of an analogy and a deep insight, on a biological, emotional, mental, and spiritual level. And I'm thinking that at the core of everything that trust me, man, I'll tell you this, man, I am not no damn expert. I done went through things with somebody who, I loved very dearly, to the point that things fell all the way apart. And gracefully, I have somebody else that's in my life right now, and I'm taking things slow, and I'm looking at it now from the standpoint of myself outside of myself and what makes this individual happy, right? And at the same time, without neglecting myself. So if we can reset as a people right there with just that basic thing, dealing with the person that we call our better half, right, or our other half, right, with fidelity and with loyalty and with proper consideration to what matters to them as well as what matters to us in terms of our rights. Not just the privileges that we get in marriage and in relationships, but our rights and their rights. And we forthwith with it. We don't trade on it, and we don't do nothing that's underhanded. We're straight and narrow, right? Then what caused things in the beginning, in that narrative, to be destroyed and to create doubt and suspicion, between men and women in the beginning, that still exists to this day, I think we'll start to see that fade away. And we'll start to see a new level of strength evolving in our relationships, so that there is a unity of God between the masculine and the feminine. Not just, you subservient to me, and, my vision supersedes everybody else's vision. Like, I seen one guy say, God, man, mother, and child, right? And that delineation, right? It sounds good, especially for the men, because of our position underneath this elusive God, this abstract. God is holistic, God is not a straight line. God is a cipher, and it's sum total of all his parts is where we get the whole from. So you cannot minimize significance and concerns of your woman, right? The legitimate ones, and you know what they are. right? And think that holistically you can be God. She cannot minimize the legitimacy of your concerns and think that she can be God, right? It has to be whole. The cipher has to be complete. It has to be balanced. These are my thoughts for you today. God willing, and I mean, if you didn't catch everything that's in here, then rewind it and listen to it again, right? This is Joshua Sadi. This is my morning conversational, and I greet you as I treat you in 360 degrees of peace and paradise. Assalamu alaikum and salam alaikum.